He fired her without a second thought. But days later, while reading his late wife's diary, the CEO found something that froze him completely. A photograph of the same girl he'd just destroyed. The morning sun spilled through the glass walls of Coal Industries, painting the marble floors in gold and shadow. Phones rang softly in distant offices, but inside the executive boardroom, silence carried a heavier sound. Lena Brooks stood near the long oak table, her hands gripping the edge for balance, as Ethan Cole's voice cut through the still air. "Do you understand what your mistake cost us, Miss Brooks?" Her lips trembled. "I do, sir. I double-checked the numbers, but the system, there's always a system to blame." Ethan's tone was flat, deliberate, the kind that left no room for pleading. Papers lay scattered before him, ink bleeding like bruises against the white. "You sent the wrong figures to Venture Holdings. That contract is gone." "Weeks of negotiation gone." Lena swallowed hard, blinking against the sting behind her eyes. She wanted to explain, to tell him about the old computer that froze, about staying late to fix it, about skipping dinner again to meet his deadlines. But his gaze was made of glass, clear, sharp, and impossible to reach through. "I'll work overtime," she said softly. "I'll fix it, please. You've done enough." He turned away, staring out at the city skyline, where mirrored buildings gleamed like polished armor. "HR will process your termination by noon." The words landed like stones. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Her world shrank to the faint ticking of his watch, the hum of the air vent, the smell of his cologne, cold cedar, and control. Then she nodded, a small mechanical motion. "Understood." Ethan didn't look at her again. He gathered the papers, aligning them with careful precision, the act of a man who repaired chaos by ignoring its cause. Outside, Lena's cubicle felt smaller than ever. Co-workers kept their eyes down, pretending not to notice as she emptied her drawer. A cracked coffee mug, 2 pens, a notebook filled with careful reminders, her quiet world reduced to a single cardboard box. At the bottom lay a photo frame, edges chipped, glass missing from one corner. It showed her standing beside an older woman at a volunteer event years ago, both smiling through exhaustion. She touched it once, hesitated, then set it on the desk. The frame was too heavy for the box, too painful for the memory. When she left, no one spoke. The elevator doors closed with a sigh, and her reflection stared back at her, pale, tired, but still upright. Ethan watched from his office window as the elevator descended, the silver doors sealing his decision. For reasons he couldn't name, his chest felt tight. He told himself it was the pressure of business, the weight of reputation. Yet the image of her lowered eyes lingered, and something about her silence unsettled him more than her mistake. Far below, Lena stepped into the sunlight. The city moved around her, indifferent and loud. She adjusted the strap of her worn handbag and walked away, leaving behind the frame, the only color in his spotless office, quietly waiting to be noticed again. Night draped the city in rain and glass. From the top floor of the Lexington Towers, Ethan Cole's penthouse glowed faintly against the storm. The skyline stretched beyond the wide windows, but he barely saw it. His dinner sat untouched on the counter, a single glass of wine reflecting the flicker of lightning. The echo of his own words still rang in his head, sharp, final, unforgiving. "You've done enough." He'd meant to sound decisive, in control. Instead, the phrase followed him through the silence like a whisper he couldn't silence. He loosened his tie, pacing across polished floors that seemed too empty for their size. Every step tapped against marble like a metronome marking regret. In the living room, a single photograph rested on the piano, a woman with soft eyes and a laugh, frozen mid-motion. Claire, his late wife. Even now the sight of her drew a twist to his chest. She'd been the balance to his ambition, the calm beneath his noise. 5 years gone, and the space she left still devoured sound. He picked up the frame. The glass was cool against his fingers. "You tell me I overreacted," he murmured. The words felt strange, almost like apology. Claire would have smiled, would have said, "People make mistakes, Ethan, even you." The rain deepened, hitting the window with rhythmic persistence. He sank into the leather chair facing the city, watching droplets race each other down the pane. He tried to picture Lena's face when he'd fired her, the small tremor in her voice, the way she'd clutched that old bag. She hadn't argued or begged, just accepted the blow like someone who'd been hit by life before. Why had it bothered him so much? She was one of dozens of assistants he'd had over the years, replaceable, forgettable. Yet something about her silence had stayed with him longer than any board meeting or headline. He told himself it was because her mistake cost money. But deep down, he knew that wasn't it. He'd seen a flicker of something in her eyes right before she left. Hurt, yes, but something else. Recognition, maybe? A shadow of familiarity he couldn't name. It had unsettled him, tugging at a corner of memory he couldn't quite reach. Ethan set the photo of Claire back on the piano and poured another glass of wine. The clock on the wall read 1:17 a.m., the hour he used to call her just to say good night when he worked late. The habit remained even after she was gone. Only now, silence answered. He exhaled slowly, eyes drawn once more to the window where his reflection hovered. An aging man surrounded by everything he'd built and nothing he needed. Somewhere between the thunder and the hum of the city, guilt seeped in, quiet but insistent. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt unsure, not of business, but of himself. And beneath the rhythm of rain, a single thought took root. Why did that girl feel like a memory he'd already lost once before? Morning crept through the blinds, soft and grey, carrying the faint chill of last night's storm. Ethan hadn't slept. The glass of wine on the table stood untouched, and the city outside already hummed with life. He rubbed a hand over his face, trying to shake off the fatigue that clung to him like fog. The day was supposed to start with a call to the accountants, another quarterly review, another stack of paperwork, but instead he found himself kneeling beside an old cedar trunk in the corner of his study. The trunk had belonged to Claire. He hadn't opened it since the week she died. Dust clung to the hinges. The lock gave a tired click when he turned the key. Inside were neat layers of her life, handwritten letters, ribbons, travel receipts, a shawl that still held the faint trace of her perfume. He touched the shawl without thinking, closing his eyes for a second as the scent of lilies filled the room. He searched for the folder of tax papers he thought she'd kept there, flipping carefully through documents. That's when his hand brushed something small and wrapped in faded pink ribbon. A notebook. The cover was worn, the edges soft from use. Across the first page, written in her flowing hand, "Claire's thoughts, for my eyes only." Ethan hesitated. He'd never been the kind of man to pry, even into his wife's secrets, but grief and guilt made strange companions. He untied the ribbon and opened to the first page. March 7th met her again today at the shelter. The girl with the sketchbook and the quiet smile. Calls herself LB, so much potential in those eyes. She reminds me of who I was before I met Ethan, hopeful, afraid, and still believing kindness can change the world. He frowned. LB. The initials tugged at something in his mind, but he couldn't place it. He flipped through more entries, dates, brief reflections, scattered mentions of the mysterious girl. Each time the affection grew clearer. April 12th, LB helped serve food today. She stayed after everyone left to sweep the floors. I see loneliness in her that breaks me. I promised to help her find a path, college maybe. She deserves more than the life she's been given. A photograph slipped out between the pages, landing face down on the floor. Ethan picked it up. The paper was creased, corners bent, but the image was unmistakable. A young girl, no more than 16, stood beside Claire in a crowded community center. The smile, shy, hesitant, belonged to Lena Brooks. The realization hit him like cold water. His chest tightened as the air left his lungs. Lena, the assistant he'd fired so mercilessly, had known Claire. His late wife had once cared for her, maybe even mentored her. He looked back at the diary, heart pounding as though Claire herself were whispering through the ink. Each word seemed to echo one question louder than the rain ever could. What other truths have I been blind to all this time? The diary lay open on the table, its pages trembling slightly under the draft from the balcony door. Ethan's breakfast had gone cold hours ago, the coffee untouched, his tie still draped over the chair from last night. The city hummed beneath him, oblivious, but his world had narrowed to the slanted handwriting of the woman he once thought he fully knew. He traced the ink with his fingertip, reading each line again and again, searching for details he might have missed. June 18th. LB missed another class today. She says she's moving between shelters. I worry about her. Another entry, July 3rd. She dreams of working in business someday but doesn't believe she's smart enough. I wish Ethan could meet her. He'd see the brilliance I see. The words hit him harder the second time. Claire had wanted him to meet the girl. She had written it as if she believed they would have time. But time had stolen her, and now it felt as though life had circled back to mock him for his blindness. Ethan pushed away from the desk, rubbing his temples. LB, he whispered. Lena Brooks? The name fit too perfectly. The age matched, the initials, even the quiet resilience Claire had described. He grabbed his phone, calling the HR department. Lena Brooks. I need her employment records. Address, emergency contacts, everything. The woman on the other end hesitated. So may I ask, just send it now. His tone snapped sharper than he intended. He softened. Please. Minutes later, the file arrived in his inbox. He opened it immediately. Her listed address was in a modest neighborhood outside the city, one of those blocks he'd only seen from behind tinted car windows. No forwarding address. Rent listed as overdue. At the bottom, a note from HR, employee terminated 2 days ago. Building management confirmed eviction notice effective yesterday. He sat back in his chair, the words blurring slightly. He'd fired her, and by doing so might have pushed her into the same uncertainty Claire once feared for her. The guilt coiled deeper. His late wife's voice seemed to echo from the diary. She reminds me of who I was before I met you. Ethan closed the laptop and stood abruptly. The restless energy that drove him in business now turned inward, urging action. He slipped on his coat and took the elevator down, ignoring the questions from his driver as he climbed into the back seat. Don't go to the office, he said. Take me to this address. The car pulled into motion, weaving through the city. Ethan stared out the window at streets slick from last night's rain. For the first time in years, he felt stripped of power, armed with money and influence, yet uncertain where to begin. Somewhere out there, a woman he'd wronged was reliving a pain he'd already caused once before, through neglect, through silence. He gripped the diary tighter. This time, he wouldn't ignore the truth. He would find her, no matter where she'd gone or whether she wanted to be found. The car rolled through morning traffic, its sleek black frame drawing curious glances as it crossed from mirrored towers into cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights. Ethan Cole had traveled this city thousands of times, but always above it, through sky bridges, penthouse meetings, and chauffeured routes that avoided the places where struggle lived. Now, as his driver hesitated at the changing scenery, he realized how little of his own city he had ever truly seen. Wait here, he said, stepping out before the driver could protest. The cold hit him first, a different kind of air, laced with rain and exhaust. His polished shoes splashed into a puddle, soaking through thin leather. A few people turned to look, wondering what a man in a tailored coat and cufflinks was doing here. Ethan ignored the stairs and scanned the small diner ahead, its neon sign buzzing like a weary heartbeat. Inside, the smell of coffee and fried batter filled the air. A waitress, older, with kind eyes, approached him cautiously. "Table for one?" He shook his head. "I'm looking for someone. Lena Brooks. She used to work downtown at Coal Industries." Recognition flickered across her face. "Lena? Oh, she's a sweet one. Doesn't come by much now, but she used to grab breakfast before heading to the shelter." "The shelter?" The waitress smiled faintly. "West End Community Center, about 10 blocks from here. She volunteers evenings, teaches kids, helps out wherever needed." Ethan nodded slowly. "Thank you." He reached for his wallet, but she waved him off. "No need, sir. Just be kind to her, if you find her. That girl's been through enough." Her words followed him out into the drizzle. The city's hum grew louder, mixing with distant laughter, traffic horns, and the rhythmic hiss of buses stopping and starting. Ethan walked instead of calling the car. Each block he crossed felt like shedding a layer of the man who sat in boardrooms and signed dismissals without thought. His coat grew heavier with rain, his shoes dulled from shine to grey. He passed shuttered stores, a mural of children painted on a brick wall, a stray dog curled beside a steam grate. The world here moved slower, but it pulsed with life, a kind of authenticity his glass office had long forgotten. At the corner, a weathered sign pointed left, West End Community Resource Center. The letters were fading, but the door ahead glowed with warm light spilling into the damp street. Laughter echoed faintly from inside, children's voices mixed with something deeper, steadier. Ethan hesitated at the curb. Pride tugged at him to leave, to send a donation, delegate the search, keep distance. But Claire's diary burned in his coat pocket, whispering memories he could no longer ignore. He took a breath and crossed the street. Each step felt heavier, not from the rain, but from the realization that redemption required more than regret. It demanded humility. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole, the untouchable CEO, walked towards something he didn't control but desperately needed to understand. The West End Community Center was a patchwork of old bricks and flickering fluorescent lights, but inside it glowed with quiet purpose. Ethan paused by the doorway, wiping rain from his coat sleeve as voices drifted through the hall. A dozen children sat in a circle, each holding a book that looked one read away from falling apart. At the center of it all sat Lena Brooks, her tone calm, her patience endless. "Remember," she said, smiling at a boy stumbling over a word, "you don't have to rush the sentence. Let it breathe like a song." Her voice was different here, soft, sure, untouched by fear. The children leaned toward her as if warmth itself came from her presence. Ethan stood motionless, watching the ease with which she moved among them, the laughter she coaxed from their uncertainty. This was not the timid assistant he'd dismissed in his glass office. This woman commanded her own space, built not from status, but from compassion. A small girl noticed him first, tugging Lena's sleeve and pointing toward the door. Lena turned, and their eyes met. For a moment, time felt suspended. He removed his hat awkwardly, as if stepping into a memory he didn't belong to. "Lena," he began, his voice lower than he intended. The children fell quiet, sensing the shift in air. Lena rose slowly, smoothing her worn cardigan, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Cole," she said, polite but distant. He hesitated, caught between pride and guilt. "I came to apologize," her brow lifted slightly. "For firing me? For everything," he exhaled. "I didn't know. I didn't realize who you were." "That you knew my wife, Claire." At the mention of the name, something flickered across her face, a small tremor, like a chord struck in an old piano. She looked away toward the children, who now whispered among themselves. "The class is almost over," she said quietly. "We can talk outside." He nodded and stepped back into the hall. The sound of their laughter resumed behind him, and for a few minutes he listened, because it reminded him of Claire's laughter, of what she'd believed in. When Lena emerged, she stood straighter, colder. "You found the diary?" "Yes," he admitted. "Claire wrote about you, about helping you, believing in you." "She did," Lena replied. "She was the first person who saw me as more than a charity case." Ethan swallowed. "I didn't mean to fire me," she interrupted gently, not cruelly. "Maybe you did. Maybe you needed to. Sometimes endings are the only way people like us get noticed." He shook his head. "Lena, I was wrong. She stopped him with a faint, tired smile. "Not everything broken needs fixing, sir." Her words landed softly, without anger, and yet they cut deeper than accusation. She turned toward the classroom again, where a child waved for her attention. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching her return to the world he had once overlooked, and realizing for the first time that forgiveness might not come simply because he asked for it. The shelter quieted after dusk. The children had gone home, their laughter replaced by the hum of old lights and the soft clatter of dishes being washed in the kitchen. Lena stayed behind, straightening the reading corner, stacking the worn books in neat rows as if order could make them last longer. Her hands moved mechanically, but her thoughts were elsewhere, back to the look in Ethan's eyes that afternoon. Not arrogance this time, not anger, but something far more dangerous, remorse. The scent of soup drifted from the kitchen, where Margaret, the shelter's matron, wiped her hands on her apron and stepped into the room. Her face carried the kindness of someone who had seen every kind of sorrow and still believed in hope. "You've been quiet tonight," Margaret said, setting down 2 mugs of tea. "That man who visited, he unsettled you." Lena gave a small, weary smile. "You could say that." She sank into a chair, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. "Do you remember Claire? The woman who used to volunteer here, years ago?" "How could I forget?" Graceful, always smiling, though you could tell she carried something heavy. Lena nodded, her voice softening. "She was everything I wanted to be. She found me after I aged out of foster care. I was working part-time at a grocery store trying to finish high school. She'd come every week, bring books, talk about college, about believing I could be more than my past." Margaret sat across from her, listening the way she always did. No interruptions, no advice, just patience. "She promised to help me apply for scholarships," Lena continued. "She even started the paperwork to sponsor my tuition, but she got sick before it was finished. I didn't even know she'd passed away until months later." Her voice trembled. "I thought she'd just forgotten." "She never forgot you," Margaret said quietly. Lena shook her head, eyes glistening. "The irony, though. The man who fired me for one mistake, her husband, I didn't know until he showed up here today. I thought I'd buried that part of my life, but when he said her name..." She swallowed the lump in her throat. It felt like losing her all over again. Margaret reached across the table, covering Lena's hand with her own. "Fate has a strange sense of timing. Maybe he found you for a reason?" "Maybe." Lena's gaze drifted toward the rain-streaked window, where the city lights blurred into gold and grey. "But I don't know if I should tell him. He looks at me like I'm a reminder of something he failed to save. I don't want to ruin what good memories he still has of her." Margaret squeezed her hand gently. "Truth doesn't ruin memories, child. It completes them." Lena exhaled, feeling the weight of 2 pasts colliding. The girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. Somewhere beyond the rain, destiny had already begun weaving its next thread. Whether she wanted it or not, Claire's promise was not yet finished. Ethan hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He had returned to the shelter after business hours, driven by an ache he couldn't quiet. The lights inside were dim, and he'd intended only to leave a donation envelope at the door. But as he approached the hallway, voices drifted from the reading room, Lena's voice, low and wistful, and the older woman's, warm like a lullaby. He froze at the mention of Claire's name. "She promised to help me," Lena was saying. "To make me believe I mattered. I didn't know she was his wife until today. I just don't want to destroy the good he still has left of her." Ethan's breath caught. The truth rolled through him in waves, the pieces aligning with brutal clarity. Claire had loved this girl, mentored her, believed in her potential, and he, in his arrogance, had crushed that connection without even knowing it. He stepped back, guilt clenching like a fist. The donation envelope crumpled in his palm. He left it on the doorstep and turned into the rain, walking with no destination, only motion. The storm had returned, heavier this time, pounding against the pavement. By the time he reached St. Augustine Cemetery, his coat was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He hadn't visited Claire's grave in months. Business always filled the calendar. Excuses came easy when the heart was afraid to remember. The gate creaked open. He moved between rows of granite markers until he reached hers, a simple headstone, engraved with her name and the words she had chosen. "Kindness is the only legacy worth leaving." Ethan knelt, rain dripping from his chin, his knees sinking into the wet ground. For the first time in years, words came without rehearsed precision. "I've been blind, Claire," he whispered. "I built walls and called them success. I turned people into numbers because numbers don't leave you, but they also don't love you." His voice broke, swallowed by thunder. "You saw that girl, Lena, when I couldn't. You gave her what I never gave anyone, belief." He reached into his coat, pulling out the diary, now damp at the edges. The ink had begun to blur. "You tried to finish something beautiful, and I ruined it without even knowing. I can't undo what I did to her or to you, but I can finish what you started." Lightning illuminated the graveyard for a heartbeat. Then darkness reclaimed it. Ethan bowed his head, hands trembling over the stone. "I promise you, Claire, I'll make it right." "Not for the company, not for forgiveness, just because it's what you would have done." The rain eased to a mist, soft against his shoulders. Somewhere between the city's hum and the rustling trees, he felt a strange quiet settle in his chest. Not peace, but purpose. He stood, soaked and shivering, but lighter than when he'd arrived. Behind him, the engraved words seemed to glow faintly under the street lamp. "Kindness is the only legacy worth leaving." He would begin again there, with her words, her memory, and the woman they both had failed to protect. 2 weeks passed, and for once, Ethan's mornings began without board meetings or quarterly forecasts. Instead, he stood in a quiet corridor on the west side of Coal Industries, once a forgotten wing of the building, now stripped of its sterile cubicles. Dust motes danced in sunbeams as workers moved equipment through the halls. What had been a floor of silence was becoming something new. Desks for students, computers for coding lessons, shelves for books that weren't about profit but potential. At the far end, a brass plate waited to be mounted above the doorway. Ethan traced the engraving with his thumb before the worker fixed it into place. Claire's promise, a center for learning and opportunity. He didn't need the applause of shareholders for this one. This project wasn't on the company website or in the investor briefings. It was personal. It was penance. Marcus, his longtime head of security, approached holding a clipboard. "Sir, everything's ready for the opening. You sure about running this under your own name?" "No press?" Ethan shook his head. "Claire's name is enough." Marcus nodded, studying him for a moment. "You've changed?" "Maybe I'm finally who she thought I could be." When the workers left, Ethan walked the length of the hall again, stopping in front of the classroom's wide glass windows. The view overlooked the city, its mix of wealth and want stitched together in one restless landscape. He took a breath and dialed the number he'd saved but hadn't yet dared to call. Lena answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. "Mr. Cole?"
"Ethan," he corrected gently. "Please, can we meet? There's something I need to show you." Silence stretched, filled only by the faint sound of children in the background.
Finally, she said, "All right. The shelter closes at 6. When she arrived that evening, the lights in the renovated space were low and warm. She stepped in slowly, her eyes taking in the computers, the chalkboard painted with bright quotes, the small reading nook lined with beanbags. "What is this?" she asked. "A beginning," Ethan said. "Claire's promise. She wanted to help you. You and others like you deserve that chance." Lena's gaze flicked to the brass plate, and her lips parted, but no words came. He continued, steady but humble. "I want you to run it. Full salary, complete autonomy, every resource you need. Teach, mentor, lead. Make this what Claire dreamed it could be." She turned toward him, wary.
"And you? Why now?"
"Because regret only changes things when it becomes action," he said quietly.
"I can't undo what I did. But I can make sure her promise doesn't die twice." Lena crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "You're asking for trust you already broke." "I know," he said.
"That's why I'm not asking you to give it back. I'm asking you to let me earn it." Her eyes softened, though doubt lingered. "People don't usually change this fast, Ethan." He met her gaze evenly. "Maybe they do when they finally see what's been missing all along." Lena looked again at the sign, Claire's promise, and for the first time, the silence between them felt less like distance and more like possibility. 3 weeks later, the Learning Center buzzed with quiet energy. The walls, once echoing with the emptiness of profit meetings, now pulsed with voices, children laughing, keyboards clattering, the hum of possibility replacing the sterile silence that used to reign. Lena walked between the rows of refurbished computers, adjusting a monitor here, offering a word of encouragement there. Her posture was calm but firm. She carried the kind of authority born not from title, but from purpose. Ethan stood by the doorway, watching her in motion. Every part of this space bore her imprint, organized, practical, compassionate. He had thought his money would build this place, but it was her conviction that made it breathe. That evening, as the last student left, Lena approached him with that measured look he'd come to recognize, half gratitude, half caution. "The center's working, Ethan," she said, "but I want to expand our outreach. There's a night program I've been dreaming of for the janitors, cafeteria workers, and drivers.
"People like me."
People this company forgot." He nodded slowly, already anticipating her next words. "I'll accept your offer on one condition," she continued. "You join the program too. No cameras, no suits, just you. Learning beside them, listening." He blinked, almost amused. "You want the CEO to sit in his own building after hours, taking lessons?" "I want him to see who keeps his empire standing," she replied gently. "You can't rebuild trust from a distance." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "All right, Miss Brooks. You drive a harder bargain than my shareholders." The first night, he arrived in rolled-up sleeves and no tie. The janitorial crew eyed him warily at first, unsure if this was some elaborate test. But as he took a seat beside them, fumbling through an introductory computer class, their suspicions slowly faded into laughter. Lena guided the group patiently, explaining concepts in plain words. When one of the older maintenance workers struggled with a keyboard shortcut, Ethan leaned over to help, his once perfect hands clumsy but sincere. The man chuckled. "Never thought I'd see the boss cleaning up my typos." "Don't get used to it," Ethan replied, smiling for real. Night after night, he returned. Some evenings he carried pizza for the class.
Others he just listened.
He learned their stories. The single mother saving for nursing school, the retiree teaching himself spreadsheets to help his granddaughter, the security guard who wrote poetry on his breaks. The more he learned, the smaller his corner office began to feel in memory. Lena noticed the change but didn't mention it. Sometimes, as they stacked chairs together at closing, their hands brushed. Neither spoke about it, though the silence felt different now, less guarded, more human. By the end of the month, Claire's promise had become more than a tribute. It was a bridge. Ethan no longer stood above anyone. He stood among them. And in the warmth of shared laughter and late-night lessons, the distance between guilt and grace quietly disappeared. The night of the grand opening arrived bathed in soft gold light. The newly renovated wing of Coal Industries, once sterile and silent, now gleamed with warmth and life. Banners hung between marble columns. Claire's promise, building futures together. Rows of chairs filled the main hall, occupied by employees from every department, executives, janitors, technicians, and their families, all side by side. There were no VIP sections, no reserved seats. For the first time, everyone stood on equal ground. Ethan stood behind the podium, a different man from the one who had once ruled by fear. His usual tailored suit had been replaced by something simpler, though his composure remained steady. The buzz of conversation dimmed as he adjusted the microphone. Behind him, the brass plaque caught the light, its inscription glowing softly in the reflection of the chandeliers. He began quietly, his voice firm yet sincere. 5 years ago, this company was at its peak, at least that's what I thought. We had profit, power, and prestige. But what we didn't have, he paused, was purpose. The crowd stilled. I believed leadership meant control, Ethan continued. I thought strength was measured by how many people answered to me. I was wrong. True leadership begins with listening, with compassion. He glanced toward the front row where Lena sat, her expression calm, but her eyes bright with unshed emotion. Someone once taught me that success isn't built by those in corner offices. It's built by the hands that open the doors every morning, the hearts that show up even when no one notices. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience, janitors exchanging glances, receptionists smiling proudly. Ethan gestured toward the brass plaque. Claire's promise isn't just a name. It's a reminder that kindness doesn't fade when people do. My late wife believed in nurturing potential where the world saw none.
I failed to live up to that belief.
Until someone reminded me what it looked like. He turned slightly toward Lena, meeting her eyes. Lena Brooks is that reminder. Her strength, humility, and grace revived the humanity in this company. This center exists because she believed that compassion can change systems, and she was right. Applause erupted, sincere and thunderous. Lena blinked rapidly, shaking her head with modest disbelief. But Ethan simply smiled. And tonight, he continued, we open this center not as a business project, but as a promise fulfilled, to give opportunities where they once ended, to listen where we once ignored, and to build futures that will
outlast us all. The lights dimmed slightly as
projection flickered onto the wall, a series of photographs of children and families who had already benefited from the pilot program. In each frame, laughter bloomed. The applause returned, this time mixed with cheers. Ethan stepped back from the podium, emotion tightening his throat. Beside the plaque, a velvet cover hid one last surprise. He nodded to the stage assistant, who pulled it free to reveal a small inscription beneath Claire's quote, dedicated to Claire and Lena, for seeing light in others before the rest of us learned to look. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping, and in that standing ovation, Ethan Cole finally felt what it meant to be whole. The celebration lingered long after the speeches ended. Laughter filled the hallways, soft music played beneath the low murmur of conversation, and the scent of fresh flowers, Claire's favorite lilies, drifted through the air. As the guests slowly departed, Ethan found himself standing alone near the stage, the applause still echoing faintly in his mind. He exhaled deeply. a long, quiet breath that carried 5 years of weight he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Across the room, Lena was helping one of the children from the shelter collect their backpack. She crouched down to tie a loose shoelace, smiling as the boy threw his arms around her neck before running off. The scene caught Ethan's heart off guard. That simple act of kindness, so ordinary yet so luminous, was everything Claire had once tried to teach him. When the last of the guests left, Lena turned and noticed Ethan still standing there, a small object wrapped in brown paper in his hands. He walked toward her slowly, his steps echoing softly against the marble floor. "You forgot something," he said, offering the parcel. She tilted her head, puzzled, and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was the old photograph, the one she had left behind the day he fired her. But now it was framed anew, polished wood replacing the cracked edges, glass shining clean. Her breath caught.
"You kept this?"
"I found it on your desk after you left," Ethan said quietly. "At first, I meant to throw it away. It reminded me of my mistake. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized it reminded me of something else, of Claire's faith in people and my failure to share it." He paused, his eyes softening. "She saw something in you I never did."
"Until now." Lena's fingers brushed the smooth glass.
The photograph showed a younger version of herself beside Claire, both smiling beneath the same light that seemed to glow in this room now.
"She changed my life," Lena whispered. "And somehow she's still doing it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of the piano in the background carrying the soft notes of closure. Ethan gestured toward the plaque on the wall.
Together, they walked to it, the golden inscription catching the faint light from the chandelier above. "Built for second chances." "She would have loved this," Lena said. "She made it possible," Ethan replied. "You made it real." The music swelled softly as they stood side by side, no longer CEO and employee, no longer guilt and forgiveness, just two people bound by the legacy of a woman who'd believed in both. Lena smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't need words. "Maybe second chances aren't given," she said after a pause. "Maybe they're built, piece by piece." Ethan looked at her, the reflection of the plaque glimmering in his eyes. "Then let's keep building." Outside, the city lights shimmered across the glass walls. Rain began again, gentle and rhythmic, washing away the last traces of the storm that had started it all. And somewhere, between the raindrops and the music, peace finally found them both.